All right, everyone, it's time for Vermont Issues, Episode 10. The governor, Phil Scott, of course, generally unbeloved, except by people who race stock cars, I guess, has said, oh, we're going to market Vermont as a place to do business. We're going to put out like a marketing and ad campaign, and that'll take care of the problems in our state as far as jobs go. How about a better suggestion, Phil? Instead of marketing Vermont as a place to do business, why don't you make Vermont a place to do business? I would think that would bring in more proceeds. I would think it'd make it better for people who have to live in this state. See, the problem is this. You can market Vermont as a place to do business all you want. People aren't dumb. They know better. They look at our sales tax. They look at our business tax rate. They look at the property tax rate. They look at the mediocre average income of actual Vermonters as opposed to, you know, if you average everything out, it looks okay. But that's because there are a handful of people that do really, really well in this state, and then there are a bunch of people in the lower middle and working class that, you know, they comprise most of the actual economy. And they get screwed. And they get screwed because of this. Our sales tax is very high, which means that a lot of people go shop in New Hampshire. Local businesses suffer because of that. They even go shopping in New York sometimes, or Massachusetts, for lower costs than in this state. So that harms local businesses. That keeps potentially productive jobs from existing. And Vermont is not a large state. You know, if we were the size of Texas, maybe the center of the state wouldn't have any problems if the sales tax was high, because they wouldn't be able to make it economically feasible to go shopping in other states nearby, because it would take them an entire day to drive there and back. But here in Vermont, you're talking about someone living in the very middle of the state, furthest from any border, can still drive for less than an hour and make it to the edge of the state. Even on our low-speed roads, they can still make that happen, like here in Rutland. If I want to go to New York, it takes about 25 minutes. Somebody living in White River, they cross a bridge. That's all they have to do. They go over to Lebanon to go shopping. There's a reason there are so many more businesses on the other side of the Connecticut River. So if you're open for business in Vermont, you'd best hope that it caters to tourists, or you'd better hope that it's a really, really low-cost business, because that's what the average Vermonter can actually afford, which means that there are less actual taxable proceeds for the state because it's a very, very low-end business. So there's number one. We've got a tourist service economy. Number two is property taxes. Yeah, good luck owning a bunch of land in the state of Vermont and farming it, which, by the way, brings in tourist revenue, Phil, and everybody else who ever holds office in Vermont. Yeah, Howard the Coward, Howard Dean the Screaming Mimi himself, really screwed up our fiscal situation when he was governor, and nobody's bothered to try to temper that since then. Whether they're a Republican or a Democrat seems to make absolutely no difference. They all agree, yeah, it's great to tax small farms under, small businesses, who needs them. We're going to ramble loud and long about how we want things to be scenic. And then the only thing that'll be able to survive here are box stores that are offering low-cost goods and services to the native citizens, or their tourist businesses, which locals can't even shop at half the time. They're like, once in a blue moon, we go to some tourist business to buy something. For the average Vermonter, who's actually quite impoverished compared to their compatriots in many other states in this country, it's just not going to happen. Yeah, you're eating at McDonald's. You're probably not eating at some of the touristy restaurants that exist around here. Even here in Rutland, there's a big difference. There's a big difference. There are the really, really low end, and then there are the fairly high end sort of businesses. And the latter is primarily for people who are not from this state, or from a handful of people who are doing very well in this state. You know, someone is independently wealthy. They bought their mountainside home here. Nobody has a problem with that as opposed to wind projects, I notice. They built their, $500,000 little cabin up there, and they pretend that they're roughing it. And then they come down into the valley sometimes to go shopping or something. Oh, yeah, I dropped like $2,000 today. It was great. Well, yeah, that's fine. The average Vermonter is incapable of doing that. Then we've got a high general business tax rate anyway. Essentially, businesses get screwed. So Vermont's economic system is not good for business within the state, especially not for Vermonters. The average Vermonter will never have the capital to open a business anyway. They're lucky if they can get into the middle management class and make, $18 an hour, or the salaried equivalent. They consider that to be like the pinnacle of wealth here in the state in some communities. Then you've got the opiate crisis that you still aren't doing anything about, Phil. By the way, it's not great for business when there are a bunch of addicts running around. It tends to harm things. At the very least, it's bad for the state's reputation that we seem unable to handle the situation. You're sitting there begging for federal money when you could solve the problem in state. Step number one, stop stonewalling on marijuana legalization so that we stop enforcing that bullcrap and we can divert that funding to other more worthy endeavors. I would think you'd be able to treat some more heroin and pill junkies if you weren't worrying about somebody growing a couple of pot plants. You still want to spend 50 grand to mobilize, half a city's worth of militarized police to go kick down somebody's door and fire a bunch of stun grenades through the windows so that they can take out that evil pot grower. And you're very worried about that, but you talk a big game, but you're not walking the walk when it comes to the pill problem. You're not really doing anything. Townships, they'll take it into their own hands and absolve you of having to do anything because you're so ineffectual. And I can't blame Phil Scott too much for this. After all, Shumlin did the same thing, supposedly, Democrat, left wing, also not even from this state and so forth. Just a crazy dude. Spent all of his time in New York hobnobbing with rich people, and then he comes back here to tell people how to live. It's dumb. So don't market Vermont as a place to do business, make it one. Lower the sales tax rate, lower the property taxes that are so high in this state. Lower the state income tax so people will have a reason to come in. Now, if they're somewhere on the entrepreneurial margin, they're not wealthy yet, and they're going to go to New Hampshire or something if they're going to set up shop. If they're going to set up their little home office and add to a state's economy, it's probably not going to be the state of Vermont. You've gotten to the point where the tax rate's so high here, the regulatory costs so high, and what we get out of those high taxes is so scant outside of education. The roads are dilapidated and everything else is falling apart. The only thing that's working is education. That gets more expensive every year too, and adds to more tax woes. And meanwhile, your solution is we can't cut a penny of spending. So far, Phil Scott says, well, we're not going to up taxes. Okay, that's fine. He delivers a balanced budget without new taxes. That's great compared to what maybe Shumlin would do, but it's still not great. The tax rate is still too high. The citizens of this state see very little in return for that. There are plenty of in-state programs that are worthy. Sometimes, though, something is not worth spending money on, because you've deprived people of businesses that might come in and actually be responsible. They would fit in with Vermont culture. They would generate middle-class jobs. I mean an actual middle-class job. I don't mean somebody's making $3-4 above minimum wage, and for tax purposes it seems the state considers them to be part of the middle class. The bracket system itself is all sorts of fucky too. Vermont is not a place to do business. Yeah, a warning to people in other states that might be taken in by this fake as hell ad campaign. We're not open for business right now. Where are you going to move into? Some dilapidated old business. You're going to get taxed out the ass, and then you're going to go under like so many businesses have. What we need to do in this state is put pressure on our government to make it a place to do business. Not market it, not say we're open for business and we love you, please come and suck us off and set up shop, so that you can give them, by the way, and this is the state's new idea. Oh, well, if you set up a business in Vermont, we'll give you tax relief for X number of years. Okay, what happens after that X number of years when the tax rate goes up on that business? Then they go under most of the time. It's a temporary fix. It's not a real solution. It doesn't make any sense. It's brain dead. That's not how you're going to attract businesses to this state. Look at Texas, where you've got no state income tax, dirt low property tax, often a very low cost of living. People are making, you wouldn't believe it. You go down to Texas, for any Vermonter that hasn't been down there, go down to Texas sometime and see how they live. Yeah, there are problems in some of their communities too. Some of them absolutely stellar. Look at another thing is the land costs, and this has to do with Dean's fiddling around with our state economy. The amount of money that you would pay here for a lower middle class sort of suburban row home, the 3-bedroom, 1.5 bathroom affair on your nice little half-acre lot. If you took that money and invested it in real estate down in Texas, you know what you'd get? You'd get a McMansion. I'm talking limestone siding, a nice fireplace, 5-bedroom, 3-bath on that same half acre, maybe even more than that. That's what you'll get down in Texas. The only thing that's higher down there is the land prices. Up here, there are communities where the land prices are actually pretty low. But as far as structures, like buying a home or having one constructed, oh man, you wouldn't believe it. Like, I looked at my budget. I looked at my income and figured out, you know, if I was being reasonable and sane and, you know, saving up, building some passive income, doing what I needed to do, what eventually, like when I'm older, what would I be able to afford in the state of Vermont? And it's essentially, oh, I live in a shit shack. That's what I would be able to afford in the state of Vermont. I would have to, in order to get a modest, you know, sort of middle-class home in the state of Vermont on enough land so I could have a big garden and some trees and stuff, because I don't want some fucking city lot. In order to do that, I would have to choose the most blighted neighborhood in Vermont and buy something that had been like wrecked by fire or or it was like a drug home, so the government's selling it at half price or something. That's basically how I'd be able to afford, you know, a home commensurate with my income in the state of Vermont. If I were to go to Texas, I could rent a McMansion. I could rent a 7-bedroom home in Texas for less than I'd be paying here for something that would be considered, you know, working class. That's how bad it really is. Look at the real estate prices sometime. It would be difficult to find a small town community anywhere in the country outside of California or areas outlying some of the very large urban areas where, you know, you get your white collar class living, they commute to work. Outside of that, almost anywhere else in the country, it's cheaper. Almost anywhere. Land prices may be about on par, but as far as buying a home, you know, one that's already there, that you don't have to do 10 million things, so you don't have to have a home constructed or something from the ground up. Vermont is extremely expensive. In all honesty, parts of New Hampshire are too, although again, there are communities where things are a little bit cheaper. But here in Vermont, there isn't a whole lot of cheap here. So who's going to move to the state to prop up those businesses to patronize them? You've created a death spiral. You've got a high tax situation. People therefore have less to spend, less to go into the businesses. And you're talking about throwing that same taxpayer money that should have been private in the first place, it should have belonged to the people of Vermont. You're talking about throwing that to businesses in the form of tax relief so that they'll stay in the state and offer goods that sometimes those natives can't even purchase. Is that ever the screwiest thing that you could possibly think of? Doesn't make any sense. You go around the country to other areas and you'll find that things are totally different in other states. Now, of course, when I was younger, I hadn't really, other than New Hampshire, I hadn't really been anywhere else. I'd been to Boston a couple times. I'd been to Montreal, but largely hadn't left the area. Then I go down to like Texas or Florida or something, whole different world. Like people complaining about the cost of living in one of these, they don't know what cost of living is. You're living in Texas, you don't know what, unless you're living in a high-class gated community. You don't know what cost of living amounts to. You have no conception of, other than AC costs. Okay, you got us beat there. That's high cost in Texas. Vermont, if you want to be open for business and benefit the native population, you're not going to do that by artificially propping up with taxpayer money a bunch of businesses not developing, not maintaining the roads. A lot of our roads are dilapidated. That affects a business too. It also affects the population. You're driving down the road, you hit the wrong pothole, and your wheel goes flying off into the bushes. That might be a little bit of a problem. And meanwhile, local businesses, there's not enough infrastructure for them to use Vermont potentially as a central shipping point very easily. Locally, yeah, that's fine. Some little truck can navigate our roads. But if you're talking a pothole-ridden road, when it starts to snow, you really think it's safe for trucks to go on some of those roads? Every year you have at least a few winter storms that are going to cause havoc anyway. If the roads were really, really good, it might not be as big a problem. Meanwhile, here in Rutland, anecdotal example, you go down Route 4 or on Route 7 or on Merchants Row or a few of the other main roads, things are pretty much fine. There aren't a lot of potholes. Some areas are kind of patchy, but for the most part, it's, you know, fairly well paved, fairly well maintained. Other than the traffic lights, we've started to have real problems with those, especially at the intersection right next to Tops. Somebody's got to do something. I beg the mayor of Rutland, please do something about that intersection and the light there. Because it's got massive, it's like 3 or 4 times now it has stopped working for several rounds of traffic for no actual reason. It's not because a cop car went through or a train is going by. Has nothing to do with that. It just stops working. Inexplicably. Always seems to happen when I'm there. I think so. It's a conspiracy or something. Just joking. But all the side roads, you know, like getting things delivered to people's homes, you know, the postal service or something. Those are all, there's more pothole than road in some areas. Yeah, you go on any of the side streets in Rutland, you've got big problems. This is also, again, something for the mayor here to tackle as opposed to the governor. But if you're going to tax people up the ass, don't expect them to have a bunch of money to throw at local businesses buying goods and services. They're going to go to another state where the costs are lower. People love, even people who are as far into the state as like the Woodstock area, routinely commute to Lebanon to go shopping, as opposed to shopping locally, because number one, there are too few businesses because of the tax rate. Number two, the sales tax is too high. And number three, a lot of those businesses are onerous in cost for anybody who's not part of that upper rung, like the top 10% of Vermonters. That's a very small number of people that are expected to prop up as well. Again, also paying a high tax rate, a personal income tax rate potentially. They're expected to be the ones propping up these touristy businesses in the off-season. Otherwise, it's all related to tourism. Well, I'm glad that people who don't pay taxes in this state and who don't live here have a good time here. But it would be better if people from within the state would have a good time actually being here for extended periods of time. Be nice if those people, again, who are on the margins of the middle class could afford at least a small home. Right now, they really can't. They can move out of state and go somewhere and buy a home, though. They can sell their, you sell your fairly small home on a fairly small lot here and take that money even after paying the agent off, and you buy a home in Texas. It's going to be bigger, it's going to be fancier, and you're going to pay less in taxes over time on it too. So, I mean, why would they stay here? Once their kids graduate, a lot of these people move off anyway, unless they're already part of that very wealthy class. And then those young people, they only come back once they've made their money elsewhere. They retire to the state of Vermont. Is there any particular reason we've got so many nurses and teachers in the state? Could it be because the only things that can survive in the state are retirees who go to the old folks' home or children? That those are the only classes of people? I mean, the state does a great job with children's health services and education. That's great. Once they've gobbled that support up, they leave the state to get a job. Half the time they leave the state to go to college too. Because an out-of-state tuition is sometimes cheaper than in-state tuition here. We've got I think UVM, if I remember correctly, years ago, they ranked it as the highest in-state tuition university. You know, for people in the state. And it's the only university we had at the time. Now we've got Castleton University, which is cheaper. Like when I was going there, I don't think I racked up any debt when I was going there because I was living off campus. But, I mean, again, we've only got, okay, we've got 2 universities in the state. One of them is very, very small. The other is very, very expensive. Yeah, good luck. I'm not the only person from my graduating class who had this problem. It's a significant problem. So why would anybody want to march in here and form a business? They'll go over to New Hampshire. Yeah, live free or die. This is great, man. We're racking in the funding. Meanwhile, in New Hampshire, the tax rate is the cost of living too is somewhat lower, and yet they do just fine. Yeah, big taxes are not the solution to every problem, fellow Vermonters. It's just not the case. That's about all. Peace out.